an email. I said, well, get such an email. So they kind of went away, and about 2 weeks later, I get this email from the official address, which was .ucia.gov, so the unclassified CIA.gov email address. And I sent an email back to the address to make sure, so we had two-way communication, so it wasn't just a spoofed email address, but okay, so they really worked at CIA. And then we went back and forth on it because they wanted me to come speak, and they kept asking me, saying, what do you want to be paid? And I said, well, I don't want to be paid. I just want time to look at Kryptos. And they said, well, okay, but what do you want to be paid? I don't want to be paid. And I said, make an offer. Whatever you offer, I'm going to say yes. I'm not going to negotiate at all as long as I get my time to look at Kryptos. We go back and forth on this. And finally, they contact me, and they said, okay, you're going to come in to speak. You're going to speak on this day. You're going to get your time to look at Kryptos, and we're going to pay you $2,500. Okay, yes, fine. So that's kind of an example of negotiating with the government. I keep telling them, don't give me money, and they insist on giving me thousands of dollars. So anyway, all right, so Kryptos, a little more information on it. It was commissioned in 1988 because the CIA had their original headquarters building, and then they realized that they needed a new headquarters building. And they started that in 88, and they kind of put the word out to the general art community and said, we need art to go with the new building. And Sanborn was someone, James Sanborn was someone who had done other art projects around Washington, D.C., and he knew how to put forward the bid and all that, and he did it. And he went through this elaborate approval process and got the bid and installed the sculpture. He had never before done a sculpture that had anything to do with cryptography. It was after he got the bid that he did a lot of reading about CIA, and then he decided he wanted to do something on the subject of codes. And he was teamed with a man who was a CIA analyst, who was also the head of the CIA's cryptographic center, named Ed Scheidt. And Scheidt taught Sanborn about codes, and then those were the systems that ended up used on Kryptos. All right. So I told you it was kind of difficult to get in, but I did get in. And they wouldn't let me take pictures of the sculpture, but they did let me take rubbings of it. And my cousin's wife was an artist, and she loaned me some charcoal. And so I'm standing there in the breeze with like 4 CIA handlers around me, and I'm doing these rubbings of the sculpture. And they made a real mess in my suitcase, I should mention. But when I got back to St. Louis, and I have all these really cool rubbings. I'm thinking, somebody somewhere in the world might be really interested in these rubbings. I just have no idea who. There was maybe 2 or 3 websites about Kryptos. Really there was 1 or 2 people that like old, lots of broken links. And so I decided to make one web page about Kryptos to say, here's my rubbings, and here's what I saw about Kryptos. And if anyone's interested in it, and if anyone knows anything about Part 4, let me know. And I put in, here's links to the other Kryptos information around the web, and here's the American Cryptogram Association, blah, blah, blah. And so I figured I was kind of like, okay, I'm done with it, and I went on to other projects. And then I started getting these weird emails that were coming in from around the world. And one of these emails that came in and said, oh, I've solved Kryptos. I know what Part 4 says. And I'm like, cool, tell me what it says, and I'll put it on my website. And he says, well, if you take this letter, and that letter, and this letter, and this letter, it's my home address. It's proof that they're watching me. I'm like, okay. And then about once a week, and it's continued. I mean, even this week, about once a week, someone writes to me and says, I've solved Kryptos. And I'm like, okay, what's the answer going to be this time? And it's like, oh, it's proof that there's a relationship between Angkor Wat and Mars. I'm like, thanks very much. Can you show me can you duplicate that method for me so we can have a third party confirm the solution? But mixed in with the emails, every so often I'd get an email from an honest-to-God researcher. And I had some interesting correspondence with them. With one of them, I actually came up with my own method for solving Part 3 of the Kryptos sculpture, and I published that on another web page. And then he and I, Gary Warzin, he actually just passed away last year. Gary and I founded a Yahoo group to kind of discuss more things about Kryptos, and then more people started joining the Yahoo group, and joining. Now we have like 800 people that are all really interested in this Kryptos thing. So this thing just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. So this, by the way, is Part 4. This is the bottom part that we don't know what it says. I'll go more into this later. There's 4 panels on Kryptos. 2 of them are a visionary table. I'll talk about that in a bit. And a keyword builds a cipher alphabet. The first person to publicly solve it was in 1999. That was Jim Galogly. He was a California computer scientist, got a lot of media attention for it. After he'd solved it, the CIA came forward and said, oh, well, we have an analyst named David Stein who actually did it a year earlier, who solved the first 3 parts as well. A year after that, in 2000, an article showed up in a newspaper called the Sun Journal by someone who covers the NSA and says, oh, well, the NSA says that they've got people who've solved it too. Originally, we'd heard the NSA had kind of rumbled about this a little bit when the whole Jim Galogly, David Stein thing came up and said, oh, yeah, well, we've got 3 people who've solved it too, but we're not going to tell you who and we're not going to tell you when, which is a very NSA thing to do, the no such agency. Though here at the convention, NSA is not security agent, or I've seen some people walking around with the NSA badges. But evidently in 2000, there was an article. And the way I got the article was when I was speaking at NSA last year. After I was speaking, they let me into the NSA Cryptologic History Museum. They actually opened it up after hours so I could come in and do research. And the librarian, while I was doing research, very quietly came up and put in front of me a copy of this Sun Journal article from 2000 that said, you know, following NSA people solved the first 3 parts of Kryptos in 1992. So I'm like, okay, did they really solve it in 1992? Is this more misdirection? Is it a real article? Is it a fake article? I don't know. I've written to the reporter of that article, I think Tom Bowman from the Baltimore Sun. I have not heard back from him yet. So I'm just kind of presenting the information here. In any case, in the crypto community, there's a lot of argument about who gets credit for something. If somebody solved Kryptos Part 4 and then said, oh, I've solved it, and then they drop it in a drawer and don't tell anybody, 10 years later, when someone really solves it and publishes it, and then this guy with comes up and he pulls his answer out of the drawer, should he get credit for doing it first? And the answer, I mean, this has been extensively debated, the answer is no. In order to get credit for something, you not only have to do it, you have to tell the world that you've done it in a timely manner. You have to tell them you've done it, you need to tell them how you did it, and third parties need to independently verify your solution. So even though the NSA is kind of saying they had someone early, I really don't think that they should be getting a lot of credit for it, because it's not enough to do it. You got to share the information. You got to let the world know. Information has to be free. Okay. So, but I will say that they're saying they did it. All right. That's more information about stuff from the article. Supposedly the CIA's deputy director, Admiral Studeman, basically said to NSA, you guys are so hot, let's see how hot you are. And Vice Admiral John McConnell took up the challenge. And apparently a 4-person team ran computer attacks and solved the first 3 parts by December 1992. But even the NSA said they could not solve Part 4. So to my knowledge, no one inside or outside of the intelligence communities has solved K4 yet. All right, this is the artist, James Sanborn. He's still living in the Washington, D.C. area, still doing a lot of art. Now, as I was getting all these emails from around the world, some of the emails were coming in and they were asking various questions about, well, tell me this about Kryptos, tell me this about Sanborn. And one of the questions they asked was, what else has Sanborn done? And so I went and I tracked down his agent and I said, can you send me a list of everything Sanborn's ever done? And they said, well, there's no such list. I'm like, what do you mean there's no such list? And they said, well, there's no list. He's done too much. It would be impossible to make a list of everything Sanborn has ever done. So I was like, okay, I'll make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done. So I started writing to art galleries all over the world and having them send me the information, and stuff just kept coming in my apartment, just piles of stuff were accumulating. And through all this research, there were 2 things, really interesting things that popped up. One was when I got a big, thick folder from the Smithsonian about Sanborn. And I'm going through the folder, and it talks about correspondence here, and he displayed at this gallery. And then one sheet was all in Russian. It was a classified KGB memo that was stuck in this folder from the Smithsonian. And I go and I talk to people who know Russian, and they say, yeah, it's left over from 1982, and it's about the Soviet dissident Sakharov. And I'm like, why the heck is this document in the folder? We didn't know, but I kind of like, okay. And I told the FBI, hey, you know, I found this classified document. And they said, oh, yeah, it's probably left over from the Cold War. Don't worry about it. I'm like, okay. And fine. And another thing I found out was that after Sanborn had made the Kryptos sculpture for CIA, he'd made another piece, which he called the Untitled Kryptos piece, which he sold to a private collector. And I've tracked down the current location. It went through various hands, but the current location is in the home of a .com millionaire in Los Angeles. And when I was in Los Angeles for a gaming convention called E3, I called up this millionaire, well, his caretaker, and I went through all the handlers. And I said, hi, I'm Ilanka, the famous Kryptos researcher. Can I come in and take a look at your garden? And he said, sure. And he let me in, and I was able to take pictures of the Untitled Kryptos piece. And I found there were some differences on that piece from the version that was in the CIA, the center of the CIA. And I've got some slides on that here. So this is the Untitled Kryptos piece in the home of this, in the garden of this .com millionaire. You can see that it's shaped differently from Kryptos, and it's got the two sides on it. And one side is it's the text of Kryptos repeated over and over. And the other side is encrypted Russian text. And this Russian text was repeated on another sculpture of Sanborn's. I should also say that this was the piece that was in the garden. And then Sanborn made another piece that was about 20% larger than this, which is currently at the Hirshhorn Museum. And it's called the Antipodes. So if you ever go to the Hirshhorn, which is that big round museum right near the Capitol building, right outside the entrance, you can see Antipodes. So the Russian text was repeated on another sculpture of Sanborn's called the Cyrillic Projector. And this is currently at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And this was the one that we put together a team and we cracked in 2003. And it came out to be extracts of two documents. One of them was instructions to Secret Service agents about how to develop a source. And the other one was an extract from a 1982 KGB memo, which was the same document that I had found in that folder from the Smithsonian. So it all kind of tied together here. And I will go into way more detail on that. Oh, and on the Kryptos side, there were a couple other differences. One was, on Kryptos, there were the 4 panels, and instead of 2 panels on the left and 2 panels on the right, on the untitled piece, the first 2 panels were up here, so you can see these diagonals. This was the Vigenère table. And then here was the actual ciphertext, but it's in a different order. On the CIA version, the ciphertext, basically the codes are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. And on the untitled Kryptos piece, this is not the beginning of part 1, this is the beginning of part 3. So it goes 3, and then it goes down, and it goes 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then it chops off halfway through part 2. So we don't know why they're in a different order, but it's interesting that it delineates very clearly where the beginning of part 3 is. Another difference is down around here. We have these 2 dots. Those 2 dots do not appear anywhere on the CIA version of the sculpture. They are only on the untitled Kryptos piece and on the Hirshhorn piece, Antipodes. I've showed this slide to Sanborn. He says, I don't remember.
Have you ever talked to Sanborn about why he's so, why he likes Cyrillic so much? What it is about the Russian alphabet that uses it more often than not?
The question that I'm repeating, the question is, have I ever talked to Sanborn about what it is that he likes about the Russian alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet? And what he has said is that artistically, he wanted to show the balance between the Cold War, between the Western side, the Latin alphabet, and the Russian side. So there was the CIA and the Russian side, and another version of the sculpture he made, and he actually called it Covert Balance. And it was actually sitting on the Mall in Washington, D.C. for a while. But he has made other sculptures that use other alphabets. He's got 2 pieces that are at the New Washington, D.C. Convention Center, which are two large cylinders, like the Cyrillic projector, with different rings. So there's a pair of rings, and there's 4 stacks of rings, so there's 8 different rings. And each ring uses a different language. So he's got Russian, he's got French, he's got Latin, he's got Abyssinian, he's got Chinese, and we're working on trying to transcribe all of these and translate all of these. The reason that we think he has actually Ethiopian, and I've tracked this down, I'm not certain, but I think the reason is that Sanborn every morning goes to the same coffee house in Georgetown, and the waitresses at the coffee house are Ethiopian. So my guess is that he got the waitresses to come up with a passage, and then he put that on the sculpture. But I haven't verified that yet.
Wouldn't it be funny if he re-encrypted it every time with a different language? So now you're not only having to break an encryption, you're having to break a language barrier and then move on to the next one.
Yeah, the question is it possible that he re-encrypted each thing with a different language? And it's actually something we were worried about. But Ed Scheidt has said that part 4 of Kryptos, though he and Sanborn did discuss that exact technique about the potential of making part 4 something in a really obscure dead language, they decided not to do it. And Scheidt has said, when we took him out for dinner in Washington, D.C., he has said, and we pushed sake on him, all these other things. He said that part 4 will be English. All the letters are used. And I've asked him many, many times if he has reverse engineered it, meaning has he tested it to make sure that it's solvable. And he hasn't directly answered me on some of these. Like I've said, do you know what it says? And he won't answer. But I really went off on him at one point, and I said, well, how do you know it's right? Maybe the reason it hasn't been solved is because somebody screwed up. Maybe there's a mistake, and that's the reason it hasn't been solved. And he looked at me right across the table, and he said, I'm sure it's done right. So take that for what you will. Okay, so 2 panels on Cryptos or a Visionaire table.